The bullet sliced through the air just inches from Jessie O'Malley's cheek, embedding itself in the wooden beam behind her as she ducked for cover in the dusty saloon. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild Mustang, but she didn't have time for fear not when she was one step ahead of the bounty hunters who'd been tracking her since Denver. "That's the last time I trust a man who says he's just looking for directions," Jessie muttered, checking that her small revolver was loaded. At 22, she'd learned the hard way that a woman alone in the West of 1878 had to be twice as clever and 3 times as cautious as any man. Outside, horses' hooves pounded the dirt road of Silver Creek, the small mining town in Colorado Territory where she'd hoped to disappear for a few days. That plan had clearly failed. Jessie tucked a loose strand of auburn hair back into her wide-brimmed hat and peered through a crack in the wall. 3 men on horseback circled the building, and she recognized their leader Silas McCready, a bounty hunter known for bringing in his quarry dead more often than alive. "Miss O'Malley," McCready called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "Come on out now. We can do this civilized-like." Jessie felt her lips curl into a bitter smile. There was nothing civilized about the price on her head, $1,500 for a crime she hadn't committed. The stagecoach robbery in Missouri had been her brother's doing, but he was 6 months dead, and somehow her name had replaced his on the wanted posters. She needed a distraction, a way out, or at least better odds than 3 armed men against 1 woman with 4 bullets and a knife in her boot. The back door of the saloon creaked open, and Jessie swung her gun toward the sound, her finger tense on the trigger. "Easy there, madam," came a low voice, steady as bedrock. "I'm not with them." The man who stepped into the dimly lit room stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and eyes the color of a summer storm. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to danger. "Why should I believe you?" Jessie hissed, keeping her revolver trained on his chest. "Because I just tied their horses' reins to the water trough out back," he replied, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "They'll be on foot for at least the next few minutes." As if to confirm his words, shouts of anger erupted from outside, followed by the sound of boots hitting dirt as the men dismounted to retrieve their animals. "Name's Thomas James," the stranger said, tipping his hat slightly. "Most folks call me Tucker. And you're in a heap of trouble, Miss O'Malley." Jessie's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "Same way everybody between here and Kansas City knows it. Those wanted posters are mighty detailed." He moved toward the bar, keeping his hands visible. "I've got 2 horses waiting behind the blacksmith's shop. You can ride with me or take your chances with McCready and his boys." "And why would you help me?" Suspicion colored her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer assistance without expecting something in return. "Let's just say I've got my reasons for disliking bounty hunters," Tucker replied, his expression hardening momentarily. "And I don't much care for seeing 3 grown men hunt down 1 woman like she's a wounded deer." A bullet shattered the front window, sending glass spraying across the wooden floor. "Time's up for thinking, Miss O'Malley," Tucker said, drawing his own pistol. "You coming?" With McCready shouting orders to surround the building, Jessie made her decision. "Lead the way, Mr. James." Tucker fired 2 shots through the broken window, forcing the bounty hunters to dive for cover, then grabbed Jessie's arm and pulled her toward the back door. They burst into the alley behind the saloon, running low and fast toward the blacksmith's shop as bullets kicked up dust at their heels. True to his word, Tucker had 2 horses waiting, a powerful black stallion and a dappled gray mare. "Can you ride?" he asked, though it was hardly a question as Jessie was already swinging herself into the saddle. "Better than most men I know," she replied, gathering the reins. Tucker mounted his stallion in one fluid motion. "Then ride like the devil's on your tail, because in a manner of speaking he is." They thundered out of Silver Creek, the bounty hunters' shouts fading behind them as they pushed their horses to a gallop across the open prairie. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they rode west, toward the distant mountains that loomed purple and gray against the horizon. For nearly 2 hours, they maintained a punishing pace, only slowing when the horses began to labor. Tucker led them into a stand of cottonwoods along a small creek, where the trees would hide them from anyone following. As they dismounted to let the horses drink, Jessie studied her unexpected ally. Tucker James moved with the easy grace of someone who lived in the saddle. His clothes were trail-worn but clean canvas pants, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and a leather vest. The 6-shooter at his hip looked well used, as did the Winchester rifle secured to his saddle. "You going to tell me why McCready wants you so badly?" Tucker asked, splashing cold creek water on his face. Jessie hesitated, then decided truth was her best option. "They think I robbed a stagecoach carrying a bank shipment outside of Jefferson City. 3 men died." "Did you?" "No." Her voice was firm. "It was my brother, Liam. He fell in with a bad crowd after the war. I was miles away when it happened, but someone saw a woman with red hair leaving the scene." She touched her auburn locks. "Liam died in a shootout 6 months back, and somehow my description ended up on the wanted posters instead." Tucker nodded slowly. "That happens more often than you'd think. Once those posters go out, truth doesn't much matter anymore." "Do you believe me?" Jessie asked, realizing suddenly how much she wanted him to. "I do," he said simply. "But my belief won't stop a bullet from McCready or a rope from a marshal who's more interested in a quick hanging than justice." The stark reality of her situation hit Jessie anew. She'd been running for weeks, her money nearly gone, and now she dragged the stranger into her troubles. "Why help me?" she asked again. "You could be arrested for aiding a fugitive." Tucker was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. 6 years ago, my younger sister was accused of stealing from the rancher she worked for. Town marshal arrested her on the man's word alone. She died in that jail cell before I could get to town to help her. His voice remained steady, but Jessie could hear the pain beneath the words. Found out later the rancher had tried to force himself on her, and she'd fought back. He made up the theft to punish her. "I'm sorry," Jessie said softly. "Been working as a guide and scout since then," Tucker continued. "Seen too many people, especially women, caught in situations where the law wasn't designed to help them." He looked at her directly. "So when I saw McCready and his boys ride into town and start asking about a red-haired woman, I figured whoever they were hunting deserved a fighting chance." Night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with the sun. Tucker built a small, nearly smokeless fire in a hollow while Jessie unsaddled the horses and rubbed them down. "We should reach my cabin tomorrow afternoon," Tucker said, offering her a tin cup of coffee and some jerky from his saddlebag. "It's up in the foothills, about 30 miles from here. Remote enough that bounty hunters don't usually venture that way." Jessie accepted the food gratefully. "And then what?" Tucker shrugged. "Then we figure out how to clear your name." "Just like that? You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied. "Besides, I've been looking to take McCready down a peg or two for years. Man's nothing but a killer with a badge he bought from a corrupt judge." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the soft nickering of the horses and the crackling of the small fire. Jessie couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe enough to relax, even slightly. There was something about Tucker James that inspired confidence, a steadiness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "Get some sleep," he said eventually. "I'll take first watch." Jessie wanted to protest, to insist she could stand guard too, but exhaustion washed over her in a sudden wave. She wrapped herself in the blanket he offered and was asleep almost before her head touched her saddle, which served as a pillow. She dreamed of running, always running. Her brother's face appearing and disappearing in the mist ahead of her. When Tucker gently shook her awake for her watch, she sat up with a start, her hand automatically reaching for her gun. "Easy," he murmured. "Just me." The night was clear and cold. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Jessie pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she took up position on a fallen log where she could see in all directions. Tucker settled onto his bedroll with a soft groan. "Wake me if anything moves," he said, then added with a hint of humor, "even if it's just a curious raccoon." Jessie smiled despite herself. "I will." The night passed without incident, and they were on the trail again at first light, pushing west into increasingly rugged country. Tucker led them along game trails and dried creek beds, clearly trying to make their path difficult to follow. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses in a small meadow surrounded by pines. Tucker had just handed Jessie a strip of dried beef when he suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his gun. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert. "Riders," he said, his voice barely audible. "3 of them, coming fast from the east." Jessie's heart sank. "McCready? Can't tell yet, but we should move." They mounted quickly, Tucker leading them into a dense stand of pines that climbed the slope of a steep hill. The terrain became more difficult, forcing them to slow their pace, but the thick forest provided cover. After about an hour of careful riding, Tucker held up his hand, signaling Jessie to stop. He dismounted and moved silently to the edge of a rocky outcropping, then motioned for her to join him. Below, in the valley they had just left, 3 riders were visible, moving slowly as they examined the ground. Even from this distance, Jessie recognized McCready's broad-shouldered silhouette. "Man's like a bloodhound," Tucker muttered. "He won't give up," Jessie said. "Not with that bounty." Tucker studied the terrain ahead. "My cabin's about 3 hours from here, but we'll have to cross open ground to reach it." He pointed to a broad meadow that stretched between 2 forested ridges. "Once we're across that, we'll be harder to track." "And if they spot us crossing?" Tucker's expression was grim. "Then we'll have to outrun them or outfight them." They waited until the bounty hunters moved farther down the valley before continuing, picking their way carefully through the forest to minimize their trail. The afternoon wore on, the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks as they approached the meadow Tucker had pointed out. "We'll go fast," he said, checking his rifle. "Stay close to me." Jessie nodded, gathering her reins. Her heart was pounding again, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. Fear wouldn't help her now. They broke from the trees at a gallop, their horses' hooves thundering across the open ground. The meadow was wider than it had appeared from above, a good half-mile of exposure before they reached the shelter of the forest on the far side. They were 3/4 of the way across when a shout carried on the wind, followed by the distant crack of a rifle. "They've spotted us," Jessie called. Tucker didn't respond except to urge his stallion to an even faster pace. Jessie followed suit, leaning low over her mare's neck as they raced for the tree line. More shots rang out, but the distance was too great for accuracy. They plunged into the forest on the far side, not slowing until they were well within the cover of the trees. Tucker finally reined in, listening intently. The sound of pursuit was faint but unmistakable. "They'll have to go around," he said. "The slope's too steep for horses where we came up. That buys us some time." They pushed on through the afternoon, the terrain growing steeper and more rugged. Just as the sun touched the western mountains, they crested a ridge, and Tucker pointed to a small clearing below. "There it is," he said, a note of relief in his voice. The cabin was sturdy and well-built, nestled against a cliff face that sheltered it from the north wind. A small corral stood empty beside it, and a creek bubbled past not far away. It's not much, Tucker said as they approached. But it's defensible and hard to find if you don't know where to look. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, one large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with chairs, and a bed in the corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding provisions and ammunition, while tools and cooking implements hung from pegs on another. "You live here alone?" Jessie asked, taking in the space as Tucker lit a lamp. "Most of the time," he replied. "I guide hunting parties in the fall and do some trapping in winter. Rest of the year, I take odd jobs where I can find them." He moved efficiently around the cabin, starting a fire in the hearth and setting water to boil. Jessie helped unpack their saddlebags, grateful to be inside walls after days in the open. "McCready will be slowed by the darkness," Tucker said. "But he'll find us by tomorrow. Man's nothing if not persistent." Jessie sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of her situation. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your doorstep." Tucker looked up from where he was slicing salt pork into a pan. "You didn't ask for any of this, Jessie." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his voice made her look at him more closely. In the warm light of the fire, his features seemed softer. The hard lines of his face relaxed slightly. "Still," she said, "you've risked enough for me. Maybe I should move on in the morning, draw them away from here." "And go where?" Tucker asked, his tone gentle but firm. "No, we faced this together. I've had dealings with men like McCready before. They only understand one thing: force." They ate a simple but filling meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits Tucker had stored in a tin. As they finished, Jessie found herself studying the cabin more carefully. Despite its utilitarian nature, there were small touches that spoke of permanence: a bookshelf with well-worn volumes, a rocking chair with a carved design on the arms, a quilt on the bed that had clearly been made by skilled hands. "This feels like a home," she observed. "Not just a place to sleep." Tucker's expression softened. "My parents had a place not unlike this back in Tennessee, before the war. I guess I wanted something that reminded me of that time." "What happened to them?" "Pa died at Shiloh. Ma held on for a few years after, but her heart gave out in '66. He stared into the fire. "My sister Beth was all I had left after that." Jessie felt a connection to his loss. "My parents died of influenza when I was 16. Liam was all I had too." "Family's what you make it out here," Tucker said after a moment. "Blood or not." The simple truth of his words settled around them like a blanket. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the eaves of the cabin as night fully descended. "You should take the bed," Tucker said, rising to clear their plates. "I'll keep watch from the chair." Jessie wanted to protest but knew they both needed rest if they were to face McCready tomorrow. "Wake me halfway through," she insisted. "You need sleep too." Tucker nodded, though Jessie suspected he had no intention of waking her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every sound: the crackle of the fire, the wind in the pines, Tucker's occasional movement as he checked the windows pulled her back to consciousness. When she finally fell into a deeper sleep near dawn, her dreams were a confused jumble of running horses and faceless pursuers. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Tucker stood at the small cast-iron stove, his back to her as he cooked. Outside, pale morning light filtered through the windows, revealing a world wrapped in early mist. "Thought you were going to wake me?" Jessie said, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. Tucker glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile touching his lips. "You needed the rest more than I did." He slid a plate of bacon and pan bread onto the table. "Eat up. We've got work to do." After breakfast, Tucker outlined his plan. The cabin's position against the cliff gave them a natural defense to the rear. The surrounding trees had been cleared enough to provide a good field of fire, but not so much that the cabin stood exposed. "I've got extra ammunition and another rifle," he said, showing her a Winchester similar to his own. "We'll have the advantage of cover and elevation." "And if they don't come straight at us?" Jessie asked. "MacCready's not stupid." "No, he's not," Tucker agreed. "That's why I laid some surprises on the trail coming up. They'll need to come from either east or west, and both approaches have some discouragements." Jessie raised an eyebrow. "What kind of discouragements?" Tucker's smile had an edge to it. "Nothing fatal, just enough to make them cautious and slow them down." They spent the morning preparing checking weapons, positioning extra ammunition around the cabin, and filling every container with water in case they ended up besieged. Tucker showed Jessie the best firing positions from the windows and the small loft that overlooked the clearing in front of the cabin. Around midday, as they were eating a cold lunch of leftover biscuits and jerky, Tucker suddenly held up his hand for silence. Jessie froze, straining her ears. At first, she heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest, but then a faint metallic click, followed by a distant shout of pain. "First trap," Tucker said with grim satisfaction. "Foot snare. Won't hold them long, but they'll be more careful now." Jessie took up her position at the window facing east, the Winchester resting on the sill. Tucker moved to the other side of the cabin, where he could see the western approach. Time stretched like molasses in January. The sun climbed to its zenith and began its descent, shadows lengthening across the clearing. Twice more they heard distant sounds of men encountering Tucker's discouragements. But no one appeared at the edge of the trees. "They're trying to wait us out," Tucker said during one of his circuits around the cabin. "Or come at us after dark." "I'm not going anywhere," Jessie said firmly. "And I'm guessing you aren't either." Tucker's eyes held hers for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. "No, madam, I'm not." The sun was touching the western peaks when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching from the east. Not running, but walking slowly, deliberately. Silas MacCready emerged from the trees alone, his horse moving at a walk, his hands raised to shoulder height. He stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. "Miss O'Malley," he called. "Mr. James. I think we can resolve the situation without further unpleasantness." Tucker moved to Jessie's window, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen clearly from outside. "He's up to something," he murmured. "Where are his men?" "Miss O'Malley," MacCready continued when no response came from the cabin. "I've received new information about your case. The governor of Missouri has authorized me to offer a deal. Come in peacefully, testify against the remaining members of your brother's gang, and the charges against you will be reduced." Jessie's heart hammered in her chest. Could it be true? Or was this just another trick to draw her out? "Why would I believe you?" she called back, staying hidden behind the thick log wall. MacCready reached slowly into his vest and withdrew a folded paper. "I have the authorization right here, signed by the governor himself. You'll get a fair trial, Miss O'Malley. That's all I'm offering." Tucker's expression was skeptical. "Convenient timing," he whispered. "And where are his men?" As if in answer to his question, a shot rang out from the trees to the west, not aimed at the cabin, but at MacCready himself. The bounty hunter yelled and clutched his arm as his horse reared in panic. "Get down!" Tucker shouted, pulling Jessie away from the window as more shots erupted, this time directed at the cabin. Bullets thudded into the logs and shattered one of the small windows. "What's happening?" Jessie asked, confusion mixing with fear. "Double cross," Tucker said grimly, peering carefully around the window frame. MacCready's men were never his. "Look!" From their position, they could see MacCready taking cover behind a fallen tree as 3 riders emerged from the western forest rough, looking men with bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. "Those aren't bounty hunters," Tucker continued. Those are outlaws. And my guess is they're after the same bounty McCready was, just planning to collect it a different way. By killing me and taking my body back for identification, Jessie realized, her blood going cold. Stay low, Tucker instructed, moving to the door. I'm going to try to reach the rocks on the north side. Better angle from there. Before Jessie could protest, Tucker slipped out the door, keeping the cabin between himself and the attackers as he made his way toward a pile of boulders that offered good cover. The outlaws had dismounted and were advancing on both McCready's position and the cabin, using the trees for cover. One of them fired a shot that splintered the doorframe inches from where Jessie crouched with her rifle. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then rose just enough to sight down the barrel. The nearest outlaw was moving between trees about 40 yards out. She led him slightly, squeezed the trigger, and was rewarded with a howl of pain as her bullet found his leg. From his position at the rocks, Tucker opened fire as well, forcing the other two men to dive for cover. For several minutes, bullets flew back and forth, none finding their targets but keeping both sides pinned down. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, McCready broke from his cover and made a dash toward the cabin, firing his pistol at the outlaws as he ran. One of them took aim at the bounty hunter's back, but Jessie was faster, her shot catching the outlaw in the shoulder and spinning him around. McCready reached the cabin door, which Jessie reluctantly opened after he pounded on it. "Temporary truce," he gasped, blood seeping through the sleeve of his coat where he'd been grazed. "Those are the Harker brothers. They've been after your bounty since St. Louis. Why should I trust you now?" Jessie demanded, keeping her rifle trained on him. "Because dead is dead, Miss O'Malley, and they aim to collect on you that way." McCready's face was pale beneath his tan. "I'd prefer to take you in alive." A volley of shots from the outlaws punctuated his words, forcing them both away from the door. "Tucker's still out there," Jessie said, moving to the window. McCready checked his pistol. "Your friend's good with that rifle. Better than most." As if to prove his point, a sharp crack from Tucker's position was followed by a cry of pain from one of the outlaws. "That's two down," McCready said with grim satisfaction. "But Frank Harker won't give up easy." The third outlaw seemed to realize his disadvantage. They heard him call to his wounded companions, then the sound of horses being mounted. "They're pulling back," Jessie said, watching through a crack in the shutters as the three men retreated into the trees, two of them clearly injured. Tucker appeared at the door moments later, his face streaked with dirt but otherwise unharmed. His eyes narrowed when he saw McCready. "Interesting company you're keeping." "Temporary alliance," McCready said, wincing as he tried to staunch the bleeding in his arm. "Those boys will be back with reinforcements if they can find them." Jessie found bandages in Tucker's supplies and reluctantly helped bind McCready's wound. The bounty hunter watched her with a calculating expression. "You're not what I expected, Miss O'Malley," he said. "Most fugitives don't stop to patch up the people hunting them." "I'm not most fugitives," she replied tersely. "And I'm not guilty of what you're accusing me of." McCready's gaze shifted to Tucker. "And you, James? What's your stake in this?" "Just helping someone who needs it," Tucker said, his tone making it clear he wasn't interested in elaborating. As night fell, an uneasy peace settled over the cabin. McCready took the chair by the door, his wounded arm bandaged but his good hand never far from his pistol. Tucker insisted on taking first watch, positioning himself by the window where he could see both the clearing and keep an eye on their unexpected guest. Jessie tried to rest on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced with possibilities and plans, none of them seeming likely to end well for her. Eventually, she rose and joined Tucker by the window. "What happens now?" she whispered, careful not to wake McCready, who had finally dozed off in his chair. Tucker's eyes, silver in the moonlight filtering through the window, met hers. We wait for dawn. The Harkas won't risk a night attack in unfamiliar territory. And then, MacCready still intends to take me in. One problem at a time, Tucker said, his voice soft but determined. First we deal with the Harkas. Then we'll figure out MacCready. Jessie studied his profile, wondering at the man who had risked so much for a stranger. Why are you really helping me, Tucker? The truth. He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a depth of emotion she hadn't heard before. When I first saw you in that saloon, I don't know, something told me you were worth fighting for. He turned to face her fully. And nothing I've seen since has changed that. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. In that moment, with danger surrounding them and an uncertain future ahead, Jessie felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope, mixed with another emotion she wasn't ready to name. Get some rest, Tucker said gently. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Dawn broke clear and cold, revealing a landscape transformed by a light dusting of early snow. Tucker woke Jessie with a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. Riders coming, he said. At least 5 of them. MacCready was already at the window, his injured arm held stiffly at his side. Harkas brought friends, he confirmed. And they're not being subtle this time. The approaching riders made no attempt to conceal themselves, coming straight up the trail toward the cabin. In the lead was a burly man with a bushy beard, Frank Harker. Jessie presumed flanked by his wounded brothers and 3 other rough-looking men. What's the plan? Jessie asked, checking her rifle. Tucker's expression was resolute. We make a stand here. Cabin's solid. They'd have to burn us out, and Greenwood doesn't burn easy. And if they rush us? MacCready asked. Then we make them pay for every step, Tucker replied. The riders stopped about 100 yards from the cabin. Frank Harker raised his voice in a bellow that carried clearly across the clearing. MacCready, we know you're in there with the O'Malley woman. Send her out, and we'll let you and the other fella ride away. Like hell, Tucker muttered. MacCready glanced at Jessie, something unreadable in his eyes, then called back, Not happening, Harker. Find your own bounty. Harker's response was to signal his men, who spread out, taking positions around the clearing. 2 dismounted and darted into the trees, clearly intending to work their way closer to the cabin. I'll take the east side, Tucker said. MacCready, you watch the south. Jessie, keep an eye on those 2 trying to flank us from the west. For the next hour, a tense standoff ensued. Occasional shots were exchanged, but the outlaws seemed content to probe their defenses rather than launch a full assault. The morning wore on, the sun climbing higher, melting the light snow and turning the ground to mud. They're waiting for something, MacCready said during a lull in the shooting. Harker's not known for his patience. As if summoned by his words, a new sound reached them, more horses, approaching from the north. Tucker cursed softly. More of them, Jessie asked, her heart sinking. Tucker moved to the small rear window, then let out a surprised laugh. Not exactly, unless the Harker gang started wearing U.S. cavalry uniforms. MacCready joined him at the window. Well, I'll be damned. That's Captain Reynolds and his men from Fort Collins. Indeed, emerging from the northern trail was a detachment of 6 cavalry soldiers, led by an officer with captain's bars on his shoulders. The outlaws had heard them too. Harker was shouting orders to his men, who were scrambling for their horses. Too late. The cavalry had spotted them, and the officer's voice rang out with military authority. U.S. cavalry, drop your weapons. Instead, Harker fired a wild shot toward the soldiers and spurred his horse toward the eastern trail. His men followed, but the cavalry was faster, their horses fresh and their riders disciplined. Within minutes, the clearing had become a chaotic scene of pounding hooves and shouted commands as the soldiers pursued and captured the outlaws one by one. In the cabin, Macready turned to Jessie with a strange expression. "Seems your luck's changing, Miss O'Malley." He holstered his pistol slowly. "Maybe mine is too." Before she could ask what he meant, the cabin door opened, and Captain Reynolds stepped inside, removing his hat. He was a man of middle years, with a neatly trimmed mustache and intelligent eyes. "Mr. James," he said, nodding to Tucker, "got your message. Appears we arrived just in time." "Message?" Jessie looked at Tucker in confusion. Tucker shrugged. "Sent a rider to Fort Collins yesterday, before the Harkas showed up. Captain Reynolds and I have worked together before." "And you must be Miss O'Malley," the captain said, turning to Jessie. "We have some matters to discuss regarding your situation." "She's my prisoner," Macready interjected, though his tone lacked conviction. "I have a valid bounty warrant." Captain Reynolds pulled a folded document from inside his coat. "Actually, Mr. Macready, I have new orders regarding Miss O'Malley." He handed the paper to the bounty hunter. "Direct from the governor of Missouri, countersigned by the territorial governor." Macready scanned the document, his expression shifting from suspicion to surprise. "A full pardon? On what grounds?" "New evidence," Captain Reynolds explained. "A man named Jenkins confessed to the stagecoach robbery on his deathbed last month. He named his accomplices, none of whom were Liam O'Malley or his sister. The real culprits have been identified and 3 are already in custody." Jessie felt her knees weaken. She reached for the table to steady herself, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "The bounty's been cancelled," Reynolds continued, "and the governor extends his apologies for the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Jessie repeated, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in her throat. "Is that what they're calling it? 3 months of running for my life, and it was all a misunderstanding." Tucker moved to her side, his hand a steady presence on her back. "Breathe," he said quietly. "It's over." Macready looked from the paper to Jessie, then back to the captain. "What about my expenses? I've been tracking her for weeks." "The document authorizes a partial payment for your time," Reynolds said, his tone making it clear he found the request distasteful. "You can collect it at the territorial office in Denver." Macready folded the paper and tucked it into his vest. His expression was hard to read, part resignation, part relief. "Well, Miss O'Malley," he said finally, "seems I owe you an apology." "Keep it," Jessie said, too overwhelmed to muster true anger. "Just go." The bounty hunter nodded once, retrieved his hat, and left the cabin without another word. Through the window, they watched him mount his horse and ride away, not looking back. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. "We'll escort the Harkas to Fort Collins for trial. They're wanted for various crimes across 3 territories." He turned to Jessie. "You're free to go wherever you please, Miss O'Malley. The territorial governor asked me to convey his personal assurances that all charges have been dropped." After the captain left to oversee his men, Jessie sank into a chair, the reality of her freedom slowly sinking in. "I can't believe it's over," she whispered. "Just like that." Tucker knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Where will you go now?" The question caught her off guard. In all her months of running, she had thought only of escape, never of destination. I don't know. I have no home, no family left." Tucker's hands tightened on hers. "You could stay," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Here, I mean, with me." Jessie stared at him, seeing in his eyes the same emotion that had been building in her own heart since he'd first helped her escape from Silver Creek. "Why would you want that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because in 3 days, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible," he answered honestly. Because you're brave and true, and I think we could build something good here together. Hope bloomed in Jessie's chest, but with it came fear of being bound, of losing the freedom she'd just regained. I can't be anyone's wife, Tucker, she said, the words painful but necessary. I've seen what marriage means for women. My mother was my father's property in all but name. My sister-in-law couldn't even open a bank account without Liam's permission. I won't live like that. Tucker's expression softened. Don't make me a wife, she begged, her voice catching. I fought too hard for my freedom. Then be my forever, he replied simply. No papers, no preacher, no promises except the ones we choose to make to each other. Equal partners in whatever life brings us. Jessie searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or future regret. She found only sincerity and something else, something that made her heart race. People will talk, she said, a last, weak protest. Tucker's smile was gentle but determined. Let them. We'll be too busy living to notice. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Jessie made her decision. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Tucker's arms went around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jessie felt lighter than she had in years, as if a weight she'd carried for so long had finally been lifted. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll stay. Spring came early to the foothills that year. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots and wildflowers that carpeted the meadow surrounding the cabin. Their cabin now expanded with a new room and a wider porch where they could watch the sunset over the mountains. Tucker continued his work as a guide and scout, while Jessie discovered a talent for breeding and training horses. Word spread about the quality of their stock, bringing buyers from as far as Denver and Cheyenne. They never did marry, not in the legal sense. But on a clear summer evening, with only the mountains as witness, they exchanged vows of their own, making promises of respect, partnership, and love that needed no church or state to validate them. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings when they sat together on the porch, Jessie would think about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a false accusation, a chance encounter, a moment of trust between strangers. She would watch Tucker's profile in the fading light and feel a gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. He wasn't her husband, and she wasn't his wife. They were something both simpler and more profound, two people who had chosen each other, day after day, creating their own definition of forever in a wild and beautiful land that asked only that they live by their own truth. And for Jessie O'Malley and Tucker James, that freedom was the greatest gift of all.